I'm recording this with my new phone because every time that I do a recording on my old phone with the microphone attachment, it creates difficulty in uploading it because my old iPhone isn't set up or something. There's something weird, every time I try to do it and I try to upload the video to iCloud or I try to email it to myself, which is the only two ways that I transfer the file to my computer to edit it, or really to create I most times I don't even edit the audio, but I have to create the video, so every time I transfer the file, Apple doesn't want you to be able to plug in your phone and transfer files unless they're pictures for whatever reason. So I'm just going to have to use this phone right now because I just don't want to deal with the delay and the complication every time I try to use my old phone to do that. And I really want to keep that phone. I really prefer that phone, honestly, to the iPhone 17, but I'm probably going to keep this one. And it's really more about the fact that I have to use iOS 26, and I'm not alone in that. Apparently, there's been a lot of complaints about iOS 26. I don't know if Apple is going to try to correct it or do the thing that other tech companies are doing where they're saying it's progress and that you just have to accept the way in which it's become worse and stuff like that. But so anyway, I'm going to have to modify my drinking. I only started drinking when I was 42. Yeah. So, it's not like I never had a drink before then. I did, but like as a habit, it only started when I was 42. And it's just a weird thing to me because I used to be able to basically get drunk and not like blindingly, like throwing up, nothing like that, but like to where I was comfortable and not getting sick or anything. And then I'd get up the next day and go to work. There was no problem. And I wasn't taking Klonopin at all. And it's gotten to a point where it's something about the way something about the chemicals in my brain or my body. It's reacting differently now. And, it's just basically a way of my body rejecting it, So I've said before that it's probably just as well if I don't drink at all. But I have a very specific reason that I drink, and it's probably not different from a lot of people, but people drink or do any kind of thing like that for different reasons. This is the whole thing with like when I was seeing my therapist and she was telling me like you should start smoking weed. Not like encouraging me to have a habit, but like she really didn't want me to drink at all because of her own personal history. That's another way in which she was weird as a therapist, just being very like subjective about certain things, like her dad was basically an alcoholic, and so that's what she experienced, so she's sort of projecting that on me. And her dad was also just basically not a good person from the way she described it. So she suggested that, and then so I started trying to like, I even got that stupid weed card or whatever, dispensary card, so that I could go to the dispensary and do it so that I didn't have to like have some random person that I'm buying it from, even though I think technically it's legal in some way in the state where I live. But it just doesn't work. It really has like close to the opposite effect on me that it seems to on other people. I remember hearing one time Joe Rogan saying that he doesn't really trust people that experience symptoms of panic when they're smoking weed. And it had something to do with like those people are repressed or they're not trustworthy or something like that. I don't remember really what his reason was, but I thought, you're wrong. You're off, by saying that. Because for me, it's just a visceral thing. And it started the very first time I smoked weed that I had a really bad experience. And so it's not something that I can do. Really the only thing I had to look forward to feel good is drinking. And it has nothing to do with trying to fall asleep. It has nothing to do with lowering my inhibitions. It just causes me to feel some kind of, analog of happiness. That's what it does for whatever reason. With my genetic makeup, that's what it does for me. But it's gotten to a point where if I drink roughly the same amount that I used to the next day, I can expect to possibly have a panic attack. And I didn't really have a panic attack today, but I kind of came close. And, that's after I had taken a Klonopin. So it used to, I took Klonopin for years and years, really in a way against my better judgment, but that was what I was prescribed it, and people told me to take it, and then they come out later and say that it's bad for you, and then they sort of crack down, and now it's at a point where I've said this before, but you have to do a piss test every time that you get a Klonopin prescription renewed, or any benzodiazepine. And that's basically I guess that's to protect against illegal selling of it or something, but it's also just sort of like the state sort of saying this is not a good drug, and it's, we want to protect people against using it and just make it that much slightly harder to get it. But yeah, it's not like I need to drink at all. It's not like that, but it was something that I had to look forward to. And I feel like I don't really have it anymore. And in a way, it's just as well, because it's not good for you. But I don't really know what to do about the feelings that I have. I really I have a feeling of wanting to escape this reality. And, I can read science fiction books, but that's a sort of a temporary escape, and it kind of leads nowhere anyway. I think I might start trying to have out-of-body experiences again. And, this is something that I haven't really even talked about it on any of my recordings because it sounds so silly. But I had an out-of-body experience. I think if I hadn't, I might not even be interested in the topic. But I think I was 17, and I very spontaneously, I think it was while I was sleeping. When you talk about this, there's a few different techniques that people use to try to leave their body, and it always involves being in a very relaxed state. In other words, it's not, I don't know who's listening and how much anyone knows about this, but it's not like you can be driving. I mean, thank God, because how would that even work? Your body would go, I guess your body would go into some sort of autopilot mode, because interestingly enough, I have heard of that happening, rarely, but I don't even remember what the circumstances were. But basically, you're not just walking around or doing something and then your spirit leaves your body, or however you want to say it, whatever you would consider is actually happening. But you're lying down or whatever. Generally, you're either falling asleep or you're waking up. That's the times that people are able to cause this to happen. And when it happened to me, I was about 17, I think, and I spontaneously rose above my body, and I immediately tried to get back into my body. And that's shows that I'm an anxious person, because what happened was that I had already read a lot of New Age stuff, and what I was afraid of, instead of embracing it, I became, fearful. I was afraid that I was going to see spirits and demons and stuff like that, which I don't even think probably would have happened. But the whole thing is like, nobody really knows it, because there aren't any truly veridical, as they say, out-of-body experiences. So like the whole idea would be, and they've done all kinds of tests on this, some people think that they have done it, but they haven't been able, it hasn't been verified in any kind of like clinical setting. They'll do things like they'll have random cards with numbers above where you can physically see it and all kinds of stuff like that. And then people who are like, somehow they're experts at this, which in a way it doesn't really quite exist, because it's it involves spontaneity, and it involves a process that you just don't really have complete control over, But to the extent that some people are like excellent at doing this, they've done these tests, and the results are basically, at the end of the day, they're inconclusive. They're just not reliable, that they've been able to verify that somehow someone's going outside of his or her body and being able to visually see the world around them. You're going to get controversy on that, because people disagree about this, but the only people that really disagree are the people that believe in it. But what is like incontrovertible is the fact that people do have this experience. You can say like it's some sort of type of dream, that it's like a lucid dream. Like you could say that, but either way, it's a very distinct type of dream, like from a normal dream where everything is sort of abstract and nothing makes sense. It really does appear as if you are leaving your body and just kind of like floating around. My uncle, who people have said in my family that I remind them of him. He was a little bit weird, and he was like a loner, and I don't think I'm very much like him, to be honest. But I didn't know him that well. And unfortunately, he's the one where I think it's possible. It was one of those things where when you're talking about self-deletion, people don't really want to. A lot of people really don't want to even talk about it. It's not even because it's like you're going to sweep it under the rug, but it's like something that makes people sad, and maybe they just don't want to say that that's what happened, And I really don't know, because the circumstances of his death were a little bit strange, but it occurred to me that maybe that's what he did, but I really don't know. But he was like an expert at this, and he would like try to go to the moon and stuff like that. He never succeeded, as far as I know, to do that, but he was big into like astral travel. And by the way, you basically can't drink and do this activity. It's completely. It's not that it has anything to do with people looking down on drinking alcohol. It just has to do with the fact that the body is in a state where it's made much more difficult to even have that happen for whatever reason if you're drinking. And also, like, you're really not supposed to eat for about 5 or 6 hours before you go to bed. But my life is sort of like, I feel lost, and I was thinking about the etymology of, the word loser, and it's basically like, well, you lost. You're lost as a person, And I don't really want to call myself a loser. In a way, I don't really think that even fits. I would be saying that in a self-deprecating way, but I wouldn't really describe myself that way, but I do think that I'm kind of lost. And, I also feel stuck, and I feel like I was trying to Google apartments in the city, because one thing about myself that I do know is that once I sort of get it in my mind to get something done, I can basically do it. But I started to get depressed because I was like, well, the city is really it's different from how I grew up in it. It's just different now because it's so much of it's so obsessed with money. And the people that are there are often just not really cool types of people. It's a lot of trust fund kids and foreigners. And I don't mean in a xenophobic way, but it's they're people with money, and they're from China or whatever, Europe, wherever they're from. And it's sort of they're using New York City as a place to have a second place, and to feel they're cosmopolitan and they're cool, because they are hanging out in New York City. But meanwhile, that's not really where they live, or they moved there. And when I think about someone like I did that video about Jews, and that again I'll probably put on private, but the people that I grew up with, a lot of the Jews that live in the city are people that I vibe with. It really just sort of depends on the person. But like I said, a lot of people around here, it's not even so much about the ethnicity. It's just the fact that they're happy to be here and I'm not, and I don't really have anyone to talk to about it. So I started to look at apartments in the city, and like I said, it started to bring me down a little bit, because I thought, well, what am I even gonna do besides live there? I told someone this, an online friend who I've known for a long time, and I told him I think I might move to the city, and he said, well, what are you gonna do? You don't even have a plan. And I thought, well, I don't really have a plan, but sometimes you don't really need a plan if you know what you want to do. But it's gotten to the point where I'm not comfortable with my age. It depends on the person, because you get people that say, well, nobody likes getting older. And it's well, first of all, that's not really true. Some people are completely okay with it. But it's also if you're getting older and you haven't really done anything with your life, it's that much more depressing. And I'm sort of constantly in this state of almost as if I were a 20-year-old, but I'm 47, Something just occurred to me even as I was just making this video, because I was thinking about, so much of what makes anyone successful in life, whatever they're doing, is networking. And you can look at someone like Kurt Cobain and think, well, he was a really reserved, introspective person, and that you kind of need to be that way if you're creative. Creative people tend to be like that and stuff like that. And it's well, yeah, but he was also always talking to people, he knew what he needed to do to achieve his goal, which is basically you need to befriend people and network, essentially. He wouldn't have liked that term, but that's basically kind of what you're doing. And when I think of the most successful person in the world, whether you like him or not, that's a weird way to say. I wouldn't even say he's the most successful person in the world, but he's certainly up there. People would basically say that about Donald Trump. And he probably knows more people than almost anyone on the planet, and he doesn't seem to be introverted in any way. He's a complete extrovert and talking to people all the time. And that's part of how he built his, real estate empire, whatever you want to call it, and part of just how he became so successful. And I was thinking, I don't really know anyone in the city. How am I going to do this? Because that's partly how you even especially with my low level of income and money, I'm discouraged, but that doesn't mean I can't do it, because like I said, I've done this in the past where people kind of said, well, how are you going to even do that? And then if I had the goal, like I was able to do it, like finding this apartment. When I got this apartment, people seemed to be vaguely dumbfounded. And that seems weird to other people. It depends on where you live, but if you live in Long Island, it's not that you would understand why some people would be mildly shocked, because the housing situation is so fucked out here. And, I'm not going to get into that, but it is. And it's difficult for young people. And in this context, I'm basically functionally like a young person, It's difficult for young people to find a place to live, unless they're sort of established and like they have, a serious girlfriend or like a wife or whatever, and then they're able to sort of, that eases the process. But I was sort of remembering, because I know that like I said about like that I had these two friends growing up, but then I don't talk to them anymore, and one of them sort of intentionally, because he did something that hurt my feelings, and also he just doesn't seem to really want to talk to me anymore because of the way my life is. It's not even that he's a bad person, but he's not really, and he's married now, so that complicates things, and I don't think his wife really would want him to associate with me, But I'm remembering that I have this other friend who is kind of like an amateur musician, like I don't really know what to call him, and he probably could help facilitate something for me. I'm not really sure, but I suddenly realized, like, well, I actually do know a few people. I mean, I used to know a lot more because I grew up in the city and I knew these people, but my dad was so old that so many of the people he knew were kind of old, and some of these people are literally, they're dead now, so I can't even call them. But what I really need to do is just sort of make a decision about what I'm going to do, because I'm in this sort of holding pattern, and the people who know me, they like me and stuff, but they know that I'm not a happy person, and I don't know if they understand that it has to do with being out here. I kind of feel like they don't know that. But they know that I'm sort of this weird loner who's kind of depressed, They just know this about me. The other thing is, like, and I did a video about this on my other channel, and it didn't hit the algorithm, and that's fine. But I feel like things aren't cool anymore. Like, I don't know who... I mean, I'm older, so it wouldn't make sense, in that sense. But, like, I look at the media landscape and, people that I see in music, and I feel like none of these people are what I would consider to be cool. Like, when I was growing up, I looked up to Michael Stipe, Kurt Cobain, and, various people, like Brian May, even though he's old, I still think of him as like a cool person who's his own person. He does his own thing, and he's very, competent, and he knows what he's doing, and he lives in his own world while at the same time being part of it. But if you asked him, I remember Adam Carolla once made this comparison about, I think he was talking about Daniel Day-Lewis, and he was basically saying Daniel Day-Lewis is the type of person who he's not plugged into any kind of like whatever's going on in the media. Like, if you could even ask Daniel Day-Lewis, I don't know him, I'm just saying, like, there's a type of person, and I think he is kind of like this type of person, who you would say, what do you think of Taylor Swift? Or better yet, because at this point she really is pretty famous, but you could say, like, what are your feelings on Sabrina Carpenter? And he would be like, I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. And I feel like there need to be more people like that, and I would just as soon not know about certain people like that, like Chud the Builder, and then I'm hearing about Chud the Builder and something about racism, and someone I know did a video about him, I think yesterday, and it's like, I don't really want to know about this person. I don't care about Chud the Builder. So to me, like, if you're, and then I would group Brian May in with that type of thing, where he's doing stuff all the time, like he's doing projects all the time, but I don't think he knows about what's going on in pop music or whatever, if you can even call it. I don't really think pop music exists anymore in the same way that rock music doesn't really exist. But anyone like a Kurt Cobain or something, like I don't think those people really exist anymore. And the closest thing would be certain people that you see like on YouTube, frankly, or podcasting type of thing. So like someone like Tim Dillon. I'm older than him. He's not exactly young. I think he's 40. He's another person I share the same birthday with. But anyway, like, I could look at him and sort of understand people thinking that he's cool. And, you think about, like, what's going on in music, and I don't think of anyone that way. Unless they're older, like I said, like Brian May. I remember when Greta Van Fleet were coming out, and people were saying, like, oh yeah, like, why are people making fun of these kids? They're just trying to, this is real rock and roll. And, they're just doing their thing. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, but it's lame. Like, that's why people are making fun of it. And he's ripping off Robert Plant's vocals, and, I mean, really kind of like ripping them off. Like, even worse than, like, when Gavin Rossdale was singing it. I mean, well, he still does, but like even worse than like when Bush came out with their first album, and you listen to it and you're like, oh, so this guy, obviously he's trying to sing like Kurt Cobain, and it's derivative of that style, and it doesn't mean he's bad. It just means, that's what he was doing, but with the kid from Greta Van Fleet, it just sounds like he's basically ripping it off, and he can sing and everything, but like everything I've heard from them, it just sounds kind of milquetoast and not interesting. And it's the same thing as when I listened to that band Geese, and it turned out that they were sort of astroturfed, and people were saying how cool they are, like this is the next big thing. And then everyone was sort of let down, because it turned out that, like I said, it was astroturfed. It was a manufactured thing to a large extent. And when I listened to them, because I listened to a few of their songs, I was just like, this just doesn't do it for me. Like, I get that it's a little bit quirky, but who cares? I was thinking about, like, people that I've been told, not personally, but like by the media, to think are cool over the years, and to think that they're interesting and quirky. And I was thinking, like, I'm sort of tired of, I don't really care what people tell me to think is good, Like, for instance, the White Stripes, with, what's his face, Jack White. I've never really liked them. And yet, it's been like, it's been about 23 years, 24 years since I know they're older than that, but, they really grew into popularity with that song, Fell in Love with a Girl, which in my opinion is one of their only good songs. But the thing where he's like doing a throwback thing, and, he's making little weird inventions and stuff, and it's all like a throwback, like it's nothing very interesting to me. So I was like, people are being told to think that this person is cool and hip, and meanwhile, at least personally, like I just don't like it. And another person like that is Bjork. To out of left field compared to White Stripes. And I actually respect her because as a musician, but I really don't particularly like her music, and I don't care that she's quirky. You know what I mean? And that's part of her whole brand, is that she's strange, I guess. But it's strange in a very sort of acceptable, radio-friendly, MTV-friendly way. But it's kind of difficult for me to think of success, partly because the world we live in now is so demoralized and so corporate-driven, and nothing really feels real or cool. And it's making me feel like my definition of success would basically be some sort of transcendence, not really having very much to do with, like, let's say I had $10 million, or, whatever your definition of rich is, like independently wealthy, like able to do basically what you want. I have a feeling I would still have the same kinds of feelings. I wouldn't be struggling, and that would be nice, But this world that we live in, which seems so corrupt and fake, it wouldn't do anything against that, And people can say, well, like, the world has always been kind of, like, media has always been fake, and I don't know, it feels like things are worse now. So I had a couple things I was also going to talk about, but I realized, I'm trying to go for this half-hour thing, and it's now been a little bit over half an hour. So I might do a video later talking about the word woke and my relationship to it, and just expanding on that, because, like, that wouldn't make a video, but, like, I might do that later. I'm not sure if I feel up to it. But yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to title this. But anyway, have a nice day. Thanks for listening.